Greetings, and welcome to Beatles Stuffology. We're two old friends sit around and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis, pretty much for the sake of it. My name is McQuarrie, and I'm here with my co-host, Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
I've got questions for you.
Okay, I am excited by your questions.
Do you still need me? Now we're 64.
I do still need you now that we've managed to scrape our way up to 64 whole episodes. That's not bad, right?
Which is a significant Beatles number, obviously.
Yeah,
I don't
of
know,
course.
apart from number nine, I'm not sure how many other numbers are specifically Beatles specific, but 9 and 64. So maybe once we get to whatever 9 times 64 is, because I'm sure we will reach that episode eventually in 2042, that perhaps then there'll be another one. But yeah,
Well, if
eight, of course, 8 days a week.
8 days a week. And also, if we ever manage to record 910 episodes, then we will have done the one after 909.
Cue drum roll.
Thank you very much. There you go. Right, we're not talking about any of those songs today, though. Instead, we're talking about I Don't Want to Spoil the Party, which is nice. Or is it? What do you think?
Yeah. I like it. I'm going to go straight off and say I like it. I'm not going to say I love it. I'm not going to say it's the best thing on the album, although I think it is potentially some of the best vocal work on the album. Certainly, I really do like the harmonies on it. But with that in mind, I have spent probably more time listening to the isolated vocal tracks than I have to the actual completed song itself. Because, all right, okay, I'll just say it. I reckon the instrumentation is superfluous. I don't think many people are listening to this for the music and the instrumentation. They're listening because of those vocal harmonies that exist throughout the song. And I'm sure that someone will then say, oh yeah, but what about George's guitar solo? And I will isolate 2 words from that question. So what?
Okay. Well, it's very unusual to hear you speaking up in defense of harmonies. You're normally not the harmonies guy. You tend to be very, very dismissive of harmonies, as
I'm the
I
Discord
recall.
guy.
Yeah, exactly. Which is easy for you to do because, of course, you actually have a good singing voice. But for those of us who have a terrible singing voice, like myself, having good harmonies is quite an achievement. So it's very unusual to hear you being so fulsome about a harmonic inclusion in one of these songs.
Well, I think it really helps with this because if you were just to listen to the words, I would end up in the, oh, God, John, not again. Or another girl's been mean to you, have they? Well, maybe you should do something about that other than just sing and maybe make yourself a slightly better proposition. If indeed you can read that into what he's saying. Although he does say, there is an interview, I think, where he did say it was meant to be one of those personal songs. Doesn't, of course, mean that he was at a party and his girlfriend didn't turn up and then he left saying, woe is me. I think it just means that perhaps he was a bit confused about why people did or didn't like him at the time. But I think the way it's put together and the way the harmonies are affected really just helps to take some of the edge off the self-pitying nonsense. I realise I'm undercutting my own argument there. It's the whole element of about tonight. She makes me sad. I still love her. Right. Okay. So the words, it's just that usual combination of teenage poetry, but it's by far the most powerful part of it because of the harmonies, and of course there's I suppose harmonies and double tracking throughout most of the song. I suspect on the verses it's probably double tracking of Lennon's vocal, and then in that middle section where it's tonight she makes me sad, I don't know about you, but it feels like McCartney's doing the top line and Lennon's
I think so.
below.
Yeah, there seems to be a little bit of disagreement on this. It doesn't seem to be quite as clear cut as it sometimes is. And I did have a glance at my complete Beatles recording sessions, which seems to agree with you, but that doesn't seem to be as definitive as usually it is. So I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, I think McCartney's on top. Mrs.
Thank you. Right, there we go. Here all night. Or indeed all week. It sounds like it, which is good because those are as you know, our regular listener will know, sometimes I'm perhaps slightly wary of Lennon attempting to strain for the higher notes, and in some songs, some covers of those songs, should we say, more accomplished singers make it sound less of a stretch. So if it is McCartney doing it, then might explain why it sounds as effective to me as it does. However, if it is Lennon doing the top line, brilliant, cracking, John. Have another go. You're quite good at it when you really put the effort in.
Yes. I don't know. It's a bit. I don't know. It's a song that reminds me a lot of "Don't Bother Me." It has a very similar kind of feel to it in many ways, and I just find it a little bit of a drag. Actually, I mean, you said that the instrumentation is superfluous. Something that I do occasionally do prior to these recordings is like have a stab at playing it, just to try and get a bit more of a feel for the song. And for this one, it was kind of interesting because it's not a song that I've ever held in particularly high regard. It's a very simple song. It won't come as much of a surprise to discover. And the chords are nothing special. It's a very simple song to play. But what kind of stands out on it is the bass. It's got a nice jaunty little bass line. So I'm going to put aside my usual but Ringo and say this time out, but Paul. He is making a bit of an effort, and I think that's also one of the things that, like you're saying, the harmonies help to undercut the self-pitying, but I think that slightly bouncy bass line helps to undercut the self-pitying element of it as well, because it gives it a slightly lighter edge, and especially in the hands of Lennon, a line like, I think I'll go outside and look for her, that could sound quite sinister. He's not got the best reputation with women, I think it's fair to say. But having that slightly lighter, well, both of the harmonies and the slightly lighter bass line underneath it undercuts that sort of more sinister aspect to it, and it does just sound like, oh, I think I'll go find her, not, well, she's in trouble now. And with Lennon, that's a very thin line.
That line interests me, actually, because every time I listen to it, I'm sure he's going to say, I think I'll go outside and get some air. And every time, of course, he says, I'll go outside and look for her. And I always think that's a bit of a disappointment, rather than come on, John, own up to what's happened. Just go outside, get some air, get yourself together and go do something else instead. Rather than think I'm going to go outside and look for her. She's not there. She's not coming. You are the writer of this song. If you wanted there to be this happy ending, you would have written that she's going to turn up. You're in charge, John. Don't go and look for it. It just makes you look like more of a pillock.
Well, quite. But yeah, it's interesting to see even that as a bit of development. I mean, we've talked about songs like "You Can't Do That," which have a very clear line of misogyny, a very clear line of controlling and problematic attitudes towards women. Having something similar here, but having it not sound that way, does kind of represent a bit of progress. And it's maybe not a big shift, but it's still a shift. It still helps, and the fact that there are other elements of the song that mitigate against that kind of reading kind of works in its favor as well. So it's good to see these little kind of incremental progressions.
Yes, he's really maturing because he no longer wants to slap her around.
Well, listen, it's 1960s John Lennon. You have to work with what you've got.
I mean, it's much more of an extension of things like "I'll Cry Instead," and
yes, that's definitely true.
The Babies in Black comparison, not just in terms of the "oh woe is me," but also in terms of the way in which it's vocalised as well, because I suppose that would be the other one, that that one of you might be screaming at your pod playing device saying that's a better vocal performance than this one. Fair enough, that's a matter of opinion. They're quite similar in the way that they're done. So it's interesting, and I think one of the reasons why it resonates with me, I suppose, in a way that the harmonies on things like Babies in Black do as well, because it's so immediate. and it's something that when you hear the song for the first time, it's something that will hopefully grab someone and make them want to listen again and to take an interest. And I think that and it sort of sticks with me every time I come back to it. I think it is by far the most interesting thing in the song, and really takes away from what MacDonald describes as Lennon's confessedly very personal feelings in genre cliche. Occasionally he comes up with a really kind of apt phrase, doesn't he? And I'll go with that. Genre cliche is about right. And I'm sure we'll talk about the country element of it in a bit. But is there anything about the instrumentation that I'm missing?
Not a whole lot. Like I said, I think Paul McCartney is doing really good work on the bass line, and I really do like what that contributes. It's not a complicated bass line, but it's quite bouncy and it's quite sort of fertile. Can you describe a bass line as fertile? I don't know. I suppose I have anyway. But it's really adding something to the song and contributing a nice underpinning to the whole thing. For the rest, I don't really think there's all that much to talk about. It's got
guitar solo.
I mean, sure, but it's just George Harrison doing his usual Carl Perkins stuff. I feel like we've talked about that in quite a few songs on this album. And whilst he manages it perfectly competently, and whilst it's a perfectly reasonable guitar solo, I don't think there's all that much to get excited about in isolation, which I suppose is how we're looking at these songs. But in isolation, it's great. But this is about the third, fourth, fifth time we've had to go, well, here he comes, we're doing a Carl Perkins thing, not least of which on the Carl Perkins cover, so it's like, it's fine, but we've done this. Ringo's perfectly solid. There's not an awful lot to say there. So I don't think you're missing a vast amount when it comes to the music, no. Okay, fair enough. I mean, there's a point to which part of me wonders whether or not they had Ringo in mind for this, and I think I may have seen that somewhere as well. Because of course Ringo will go on and do the wonderful parodic Act Naturally, because we do need to talk about country music, and it seems to be the kind of country music that they are interested in. That quite jaunty, sort of up tempo. Kind of country rocker, which I don't necessarily think is typical of what was happening in country at the time, I don't think. But maybe the nature of it and what they were trying to do, and when they were recording it is sort of indicated by the fact that although they did do, I think it was about 19 takes, only 5 of them were complete, from which they obviously chose the one that got released. So it's not one that they put a whole ton of effort into. It was very much a case of let's get it done, and not one that gets played live as well. So not necessarily one that they have invested a whole lot of afterlife in, which is a shame, because of course they played Babies in Black a lot live, and you sort of think that maybe particularly if you're going and doing shows in America and in the South, that actually adding something else with a country twang might have been even better for those performances. Although, of course, insert your own reference to the fact that no one was listening anyway. So country. What's your relationship with country music? Not good. I mean, I'm not a big country music fan. It's not really my genre, truth be told. It doesn't mean that I dislike all of it. I don't. But the little bits and pieces of it that I do enjoy are like really predictable. Like I have a couple of like the Johnny Cash Americana LPs, stuff like that. So I mean, yeah, it's all pretty obvious stuff. I'm not a super big country music fan, so that kind of aspect of it doesn't particularly grab me. It's interesting what you're saying actually about the idea that this might have been a better choice than something like Babies in Black, but I think I might slightly push back against that, simply on the grounds that the Beatles have quite a lot of songs that sound like this. They don't have an awful lot of songs that sound like Babies in Black. They don't really do much in the way of waltz, so this wouldn't necessarily contribute much in terms of the variety of the set, whereas Babies in Black, for all its faults, of which I believe we have enumerated fairly articulately, it is something which is in a different style. So if you're going for like a broad range to appeal to a wide audience, there are other songs, not necessarily direct country songs or songs as directly as country sounding as this, but there's enough which, like I said, like we've talked about I'll Cry Instead, we've talked about Don't Bother Me, like there are other songs that sound like this in the back catalogue, so that might push it. But in terms of my own relationship to country music, yeah, it's fine, but it's not my bag, Daddy-o. What about yourself?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it's such a hugely diverse genre, and yet it's also a genre that most people think sounds exactly the same, which is quite interesting. And it has huge sales, particularly in America. And dear listener, if you've been with us for a while, please let me know if I've said this before. But I can remember a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I think it may have been the first COVID trip we made out to the in-laws in New Mexico. And as I was approaching my 50th birthday at the time, my father-in-law had a copy of the is it the AARP magazine, but whatever the American Association for Retired People, 50 counts, just like Saga does in the UK. And there was sort of various interviews with people in there, and I'm pretty sure I read in there Ringo Starr saying how much he loved country music, and Liverpool is the country capital of the UK. I just thought, is it? Okay. So, the implication there, I guess, would be that at least he would have been exposed to a lot of this music when he was younger. But I think growing up, probably my main exposure to country music would have been the likes of, now let's unpack this for American listeners. I'm pretty sure, let's see, would it have been Eddie Large from 70s UK Saturday night comedy duo?
Little
Eddie Large doing impressions of Dolly Parton, where they riffed on a particular feature that she had, as though that was the most sophisticated piece of humour on the planet. So
he stuck a couple of balloons up his t-shirt, is what you're trying to say.
Did, yeah. I mean, it was the 70s, man, weren't it? Actually, it probably then went into the 80s. At different times, and oh my God, yeah. I mean, all I can do is say, oh my God, yeah, and hope that the listener infers from that it's a very embarrassing memory. But I think it just sounded very different to the kind of music that a lot of us were generally listening to. So, and especially, actually, of course, the other exposure at that time, although I only came to it a few years later, was Billy Connolly's country and western super song. I'm sure I've mentioned this before. The "Oh My Granny Was a Cripple from Nashville" thing. It was all death and misery, and some of it is. I'm pretty sure. I mean, Garth Brooks has sold millions of records. I'm pretty sure he's probably not all, death and misery and go get your shotgun kind of Hank Williams style. But but there are examples from '64 that's worth mentioning. I haven't mentioned my own experience then. John Wesley Harding and Graham Parsons, and to a lesser extent Johnny Cash. The Johnny Cash one was useful because Dad liked Johnny Cash, so when I started hearing a few things that I didn't think were too bad, it gave us something to talk about, in his later years. But anyway. So very, very limited, and I suppose a few others that would be kind of linked to a country adjacent, I suppose, like Linda Ronstadt, heading into sort of John Prine territory maybe, but I don't know how much there's that sort of folk rock country crossover. But there's an element of storytelling in country music which isn't always apparent in pop and rock, which is something that is potentially interesting. I think you get some quite vividly drawn characters, but so in '64 I had a little dive into some of the big country hits, and actually what you get in '64, in the summer of '64, is Jim Reeves. Jim Reeves, big hit with Distant Drums. Remember, was quite an early number one, I believe. in the UK. Died in a plane crash in the summer of '64, and soon after that, he had first of what apparently was many. You know, what's the word? Posthumous. Thank you. Posthumous hits called I Guess I'm Crazy. And listening to that, it's quite a good song. I Guess I'm Crazy to Love You is the idea. It's a bit more laconic than Spoil the Party, but I guess the tone is reasonably accurate. But then, that's when you start sort of seeing connections all over the place. That was produced by Chet Atkins. Now, Chet Atkins is a name that has come up on this podcast before because of his album Chet Atkins Picks the Beatles, which was a big hit on the country chart. So you sort of then see that there is this circularity, and that they may have been influenced by something, but then they go on and influence something else. For example, Johnny Cash also had a big hit on the country charts with Understand Your Man. And the reason why I think this is interesting is because it offers a much different look at the women don't understand me genre that John Lennon has sort of moved into at this stage, because it's more like, that's it, I've had enough, you ain't good enough for me kind of thing. So basically the song is about, well, that's it, I've had enough of you, I'm leaving, I'm not even going to turn around and look, don't bother coming after me. So there's much more of that kind of I'm in charge here element, whereas I suppose people would argue that Lennon is it's that first dive into that new man expressing some kind of vulnerability. Anyway, so just to give you an idea about how the circularity feeds into this, in that Johnny Cash song, Understand Your Man, actually sounds a lot like Don't Think Twice, It's All Right, which I think it's palpably obvious that Dylan song was a big influence on Lennon. So you've got a lot going on, and I suppose it's a reminder, isn't it, that people are discovering music at this time, that they're broadening their experience of songwriting. So I don't necessarily think that people were definitely saying, oh, I'll take that, I'll take that, I'll take that. But perhaps people were coming up with similar ideas at a similar time and using them in different ways. So you get things that are quite reminiscent of each other. But I mean, it's worth sort of having a listen to some of it, because there are clear influences across lots of periods. The one that sort of springs to mind at the moment is from the Waterboys' wonderful album Fisherman's Blues, a song called Has Anyone Here Seen Hank, about Hank Williams, and so that there are influences all over the place. And it's just very interesting, isn't it, that this album is the point at which the country music influence seems to be kicking in. Have we gone through the black music influence now and moved on to something else, I wonder?
I think that's one of the things that is most interesting about it, is the way that those discoveries happen, and the way that music was discovered in a completely different way. It's banal to the point of tedium to say, oh, the internet's changed everything, but of course it has. I mean, growing up, the exposure I had to country music was virtually nil, and that in a way is quite unusual, because I'm from Glasgow, and Glasgow is a big country music loving city, and for exactly the same reason that Liverpool was, which is it's a port city, or at least it was a port city. It's not really anymore. And there's a huge influence with records being brought in. There's still a Grand Ole Opry in Govan. Country music. My uncle was a massive country music fan. Really big fan of westerns as well. The two were very closely linked. If you found somebody who liked country music, chances are they were going to really love westerns as well, for exactly the same reason. It's not something sort of beyond my uncle that I really had much exposure to growing up. But I mean, sort of going back to the 60s, I mean, it is worth remembering there had been a few country hits both in America and the UK, which had helped to kind of push the barrier. You have Tennessee Ernie Williams and 16 Tons. You've got Big Bad John. So there's been one or two songs which have managed to kind of like get over that hurdle. But I think this is definitely the point, early 60s, where where it kind of breaks out of the genre ghetto, let's say it that way. Country music has been around for a very long time, and you can argue about when sort of bluegrass became country music and all that kind of development, in the same way that you can in the way that the kind of blues became kind of rock and roll, became kind of all that kind of stuff. So there's plenty of conversation to be had there, but generally speaking, you're starting to get songs that are breaking out of that genre ghetto now. Obviously, stuff like John Lindsay Harding is contributing to that, and there's just a general feel that that country is becoming less of that ghetto, and it's happening in parallel with things like black female singing groups coming through. Motown is developing, Smokey Robinson and the Miracles are around at this time. Like there's so much which is coming up, and it's kind of breaking through simultaneously. We have a tendency to think of, in a broader cultural sense, not you and I, have a tendency to think of music as kind of falling into that division of sort of the 1963 split. Everything that happened before 1963, kind of crap. Everything that happens after 1963, once the Beatles arrive, the walls all fall down. But that's not really accurate. There are so many other genres which are starting to break through in the early 60s, not necessarily always getting to the top of the charts, but which are absolutely kind of getting out of the ghetto. And the one or two that do manage to kind of get right up to the top of the charts are the ones which then we become sort of more familiar with. So it is kind of interesting to see country going through precisely the same process that we've had with the black female groups, with soul, with Motown, and all that kind of stuff. The influence of country is stamped all over this album. I mean, it's kind of the country album.
So it'd be useful to get, because we will do an episode that kind of summarises the whole album. It would be useful if we do have a dear listener who has a little bit more knowledge about country music than us.
That wouldn't be hard to find.
Well, quite, yeah. Just to kind of give us some sort of sense of perhaps how the country music world might look at others coming in and dipping their toes into this sort of thing and then moving on to something else. That look at that whole sort of country element. But in addition to that, because the thing that occurs to me is that it may be that one of the reasons why there are these crossovers, these breakthroughs, is because of the changing media landscape and the fact that more things are getting played, more influencers are getting played, might be more disposable income as well for people to spend on, shall we say, loosely say, entertainment products. So there's that growing sense of youth culture. So that whole kind of sociological element that I'm sure there's plenty of research into, and people are looking for different things, and perhaps some of the traditional forms of entertainment they've been presented with just don't cut the mustard anymore. And trying to find those niche elements are much more interesting, and you get into the whole subculture aspect there. But I find it particularly interesting because, of course, at the point at which the Beatles are starting to show some of these alternative influences, the Rolling Stones are getting ready to release Little Red Rooster, and the Kinks are releasing things like You Really Got Me. I don't know why I did that weird intonation there. The Kinks releasing You Really Got Me. Never mind. So we're starting to see people go in different areas, and then I start sort of wondering, did the Rolling Stones ever really have a kind of like a wacky phase where they did something that was apart from their Satanic Majesties nonsense, a long way outside.
We don't talk about that album.
Yeah, no. Outside kind of like the bluesy rock element. Obviously, the Kinks did. I mean, the Kinks went, full on weird, particularly in the 70s. But the Stones just feel like much more of a. The Stones just permanently feel like they never have a sense of humour, which I suppose is the Beatles aspect to it. One final thing that I've got on this is I was having a little look at the Beatles records I brought back from Christmas with the in-laws, which includes Beatles 65, which would seem to be the most natural fit for this to be on, because it's got things like Babies in Black, I'll Follow the Sun, Mr. Moonlight, Honey Don't, included. But it's not on this. Capitol Records saved this for the next release, which was the Beatles 6, which was released in June 65. So it wasn't considered up to scratch to being on the same record as Mr. Moonlight. Interpret that how you like. However, when they do release it, it's on side 1. It's the penultimate song of side 1. Which feels like that perhaps that maybe the traditional people involved in the track listing weren't involved there, because I kind of think it works here, especially because of what we're going to go on and talk about in episode 65. Oh, look, I'm holding Beatles 65 here now. 65, there's another number. Anyway, so yeah, I think more of that in the next episode. So there's a little bit of a tease for you, dear listener.
Lovely. I'm going to slightly push back on something that you said.
Whoa.
Before I ask you how to score this, which is for all the flaws of the Stones and their inability to have much of a sense of humour, like the odd moments where they do like dip into country music is actually where I think the humour comes through. Particularly
Tumbling Dice.
No, I was going to say Dead Flowers on Sticky Fingers, and possibly maybe Sweet Virginia on Exile.
Okay.
I think when they do lapse into country music, I'm not actually really a big fan of Tumbling Dice as a song. I don't think it's all that great. I know it's one of the classics, but I'm not really a big fan of it. But yeah, like particularly Dead Flowers is kind of funny, and maybe even Let It Bleed. You could stretch a point there. But anyway, so I just want to slightly.
I bow to no one in my knowledge of ABC's The Lexicon of Love. However, I have to admit that perhaps I'm not quite so knowledgeable about Mr. Rolling and Mr. Stone.
No, that's fair enough. Those are two gentlemen who I only have a passing acquaintance with myself. Right, anyway, let's leave that where we are and give I Don't Want to Spoil the Party score. What do you want to give it?
So, having said that, I like it, you're going to be surprised because I'm only going to give it a 6. But then that's the problem with your scoring system and the fact that we have to do this. So I just going to have so much lumped into the middle because it's perfectly fine. I like it. I think it works on the album. But you know what? There's better stuff to come.
Yeah, that seems fair. I'm going to go a bit lower. I think I'm going to give this a 4, maybe. Yeah, I think a 4.
So put my 6 and your 4 together.
Yeah.
64.
Hey!
Episode 64.
Wow, we're really knocking our numerology out of the park this episode, aren't we?
Absolutely. Guy Ritchie would love us.
Oh, well, it'd be nice if somebody did. Right, okay. Let's leave things there. You can really get a hold of us. You can contact us by email. Please do, especially if you know anything about country music. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. We are also on Twitter for some reason at Beatles_ology, and we're Beatles Stuffology on Instagram. You can find my blog at www.jgmcquarrie.scot. Please also check out my other podcast, which is Talking Trek to You, where a noob and an expert go through the classic series of Star Trek episode by episode. Please like, rate and review us on whatever podcatcher you're using so that more people can find the show. Next episode, what you're doing. And we hope you're going to join us for it. But until then, keep listening.